In a recent presidential debate, one of the candidates talked about mass immigration, open border, being an enemy of Black American workers. Much of the media responded in just amazement that something like that could be said. It can't be. And as usual, experts were trotted out to say that basically what people can see with their eyes is just not true. You can go to impoverished communities in South Chicago and various Black communities, urban communities around the country, and you look at what's happening there, and basically the experts say, yes, but our econometric studies show us that that's not true. Your eyes are lying. You have lying eyes. This has been going on for decades in terms of ignoring what mass immigration has done to Black communities. And one of the big lies is that low immigration does not help Black communities. And this is where it's important to know the history. We do have some, I think, an increasing number of people who actually are changing their mind, coming out and speaking. Sir Angus Deaton, a Nobel Prize winning economist at Princeton, after a lifetime of referring to econometric studies and saying mass immigration is good for a lot of people and it has relatively small harm. He's come out and said, I changed my mind, I'm wrong. I'm busy looking at these econometric models instead of what you can see with your eyes. And he said historians have a better idea about what immigration does than does these high-level econometric studies. So it's important. We don't have to guess what would happen if we would lower immigration. We have had a couple of major pilot projects. One of the pilot projects was right after right after the Civil War. That wasn't a matter of having low immigration, but moderate immigration. Slaves were freed, and for about 10 years, Black Americans moved north, succeeded, rose the job ladder, started businesses, but in a deal that was intentional. In 1880, mass immigration was created in a whole new level. Of course, Reconstruction ended. The troops were pulled out of the South after 1876. And we went through a period of about 40 years of mass immigration in which not only did Blacks cease being able to move out of the South to go to jobs in the North, but Blacks in the North had to move back South. So that brings us to World War I. And I'll quickly just mention that World War I, Congress didn't save Black Americans on this, but I guess you could say the Germany and Italy did. But you had World War I, and World War I stopped the mass movement of Europeans into the United States. And so for 4 years, we had low immigration, and 500,000 Blacks moved out of the South to jobs in the North because the Northern industrialists needed the labor. They needed the labor so badly, they sent recruiters throughout the South to recruit. I mean, can you imagine today, Kathleen, if the big businesses around America needed labor so badly that they would send recruiters into the job deserts of urban communities around America and be recruiting. But they don't need to recruit now because our government provides them with foreign workers. Now, World War I ended, thankfully, but high immigration began again. And in 1923, just to remind you, in 1923, we still had about 90% of the descendants of American slavery still lived in the states of the Confederacy. And let's not sugarcoat it. At that time, this was an apartheid system, a legal apartheid system, in which most of the local governments turned a blind eye to vigilantism, to lynching. That most people lived and worked in poverty, and they couldn't leave because there was no place to go to. But in 1924, Congress passed an immigration act that slashed immigration numbers. And for the next 40 years, we saw an amazing transformation of the African American population. We know what low immigration will do because we have the history of 1924 to 1965. It ended in 1965 because Congress started a new immigration program. They repassed mass immigration. More about that probably at another point. But the main point here that I would make about our history is that we don't have to guess. We don't have to do econometric studies. Historians can show us what happened. It's very interesting. In 1923, A. Philip Randolph, a leftist labor activist, one of the great black leaders of the 20th century, he looked at what had happened with just temporary cuts in immigration. And he predicted that if we could have a long-term period of low immigration, he said that the Black Americans would experience better education, better housing, get voting rights, apartheid would end, and there would even be an end to lynching. And basically, over the next 40 decades, it was slow, but some of it was slow. The economic progress was immediate, but the civil rights happened eventually over those 40 years. So these are the things that we know can happen. Barbara Jordan came along, headed a commission in the 1990s, and that commission basically came up with a plan that was very, very similar to what black editors were calling for in the late teens and the 1920s. And that was, cut immigration way back and use that as the best black economic improvement program that you could possibly pass. Unfortunately, Congress turned its back to that, and we're still in the situation right now that, in a sense, it's not the same as 1923, but I tell you, or I could say in early 1924, but in 2024, in many black urban communities around the country, the prospects are about as dire as they were 100 years ago. And mass immigration is a major reason for that.